The auctioneer showed up at 8 in the morning. He drove a county vehicle, wore a county badge, and carried a clipboard with one property on it. 320 acres outside of Millhaven, Iowa, belonging to a man named Dale Briggs. The notice had been posted for 30 days. The taxes were 18 months overdue. And as far as the county was concerned, the whole thing, every acre, every building, every strip of tillable ground, was going up for sale that Tuesday in October 1985. Except it wasn't. Not all of it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Go back to 1978. Dale Briggs was 31 years old and doing exactly what every farm lender in the Midwest was telling farmers to do. Buy land. Land prices were climbing 15% a year. The economists called it a boom. The bankers called it opportunity. Dale called it common sense. He'd been farming 160 acres he'd inherited from his father. Debt-free. Tight operation. Nothing fancy. Then the First National Bank of Millhaven offered him a loan at 13% interest to buy the neighboring 160 acres. The asking price was $1,600 per acre. Total purchase, $256,000. Dale put $56,000 down, everything he'd saved, and financed the remaining $200,000 over 25 years. He consolidated both parcels under one deed, one title, one mortgage, one legal description covering all 320 acres. That decision seemed smart in 1978. By 1983, it was a trap. Here's how the trap worked. When land prices collapsed, and they collapsed hard, dropping 40% in some Iowa counties by 1984, Dale's $256,000 investment was suddenly worth closer to $160,000. But his mortgage didn't drop with the land. He still owed the bank $187,000. And his interest rate, which had floated upward with the market, was now sitting at 16%. His annual interest alone was nearly $30,000. On a farm that was netting maybe $22,000 in a good year. The math had stopped working, and the county hadn't waited for him to figure that out. Property taxes had increased as assessments climbed during the boom years. When Dale stopped making payments, first the bank payments, then the tax payments, both accounts went delinquent at the same time. The bank sent letters. The county sent notices. Dale kept farming, kept hoping grain prices would recover, kept telling himself the market would turn. It didn't turn fast enough. The first real signal that something had to change came on a Thursday morning in February 1984. Dale was sitting at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee and 2 pieces of mail he hadn't wanted to open. One was from First National. The other was from the county assessor's office. He opened the bank letter first. It was a formal notice of default. 90 days to cure or face acceleration of the full balance. He set it face down on the table. He opened the county notice. 18 months of delinquent property taxes. $4,200 owed. Interest accruing daily. He sat there for a long time looking at a hand-drawn map of his land. Both parcels. 320 acres under one deed. One legal document tying all of it together. One deed, one risk. He didn't sleep much that night. The next morning he drove to see Ray Folger, an attorney in town who handled farm estate work and the occasional land transaction. Folger wasn't a fancy lawyer. He wore the same kind of boots Dale wore. He understood what it meant to look at land and see your whole life sitting there. Dale spread the map on Folger's desk and explained the situation. The mortgage, the tax lien, the default notice. Folger listened. He asked a few questions. Then he leaned back and said something Dale hadn't considered. "You've got one deed. That means one foreclosure event. Bank or county takes action, they take all of it. Everything you own in one legal parcel goes with it. Dale stared at the map. But a deed is just a document, Folger continued. You can subdivide it, file 2 separate legal descriptions, 2 separate tax accounts, 2 separate titles. And if one of them gets taken, the other one stays yours. Dale looked up. Can you do that while I'm already in default? You can do it any time before the lien finalizes against the whole parcel, Folger said. Once the county certifies the full lien and moves toward tax sale, the window closes. But right now, you still have time. He restructured. It took 6 weeks. Folger worked with a surveyor to draw a legal subdivision of the 320 acres into 2 distinct parcels. The first parcel, 160 acres of core ground, the original family land, the good soil, the home site, the machine shed, the grain bins. Low leverage, lower assessed value, and the piece that was actually generating income. This parcel had no bank mortgage. Dale owned it clear, except for a portion of the consolidated tax bill that Folger worked to apportion. The second parcel, 160 acres of expansion ground. The 1978 purchase. The high-leveraged land. The debt-heavy portion. The parcel that carried the full $187,000 mortgage balance with First National. This was the land bought at peak prices. This was the land underwater. 2 deeds, 2 tax accounts, 2 legal identities. The mortgage was formally assigned to the expansion parcel only. Folger drafted the restructuring documents, filed them at the county recorder's office, and updated the tax records. It wasn't a trick. It wasn't a loophole. It was a legal subdivision of property. The same process a developer might use splitting a large lot into 2 smaller ones. Completely standard, completely recorded, completely above board. Dale paid Folger $800 for the work. Then he started making choices. He knew he couldn't save everything. He'd run the numbers enough times to know that. At 16% interest on $187,000, with land prices still falling and grain prices soft, the expansion parcel was gone. Maybe not today, maybe not this month. But it was gone. The question was whether he was going to let it pull the core land down with it. He stopped making payments on the expansion parcel. He took every dollar he could scrape together, the $22,000 net from that year's harvest, the small emergency fund he'd been guarding, and he applied it to the core parcel. He got the core parcel's tax account current. He kept it current. He let the expansion account go. People in town found out. These things always get around in a county of 12,000 people. The coffee shop on Main Street was where Dale heard most of it. A man named Len Garver, who farmed 3 sections west of town and had done well enough through the boom years, said it loud enough for Dale to hear from 2 booths away. Briggs is walking away from half his ground. Couldn't handle it. Heard he just stopped paying. Dale drank his coffee and didn't respond. A younger farmer named Curtis Peel said he'd heard Dale was surrendering the north parcel. Just giving it up, Curtis said. All that ground, just letting it go. Dale paid for his coffee and left. Here's the thing about farming culture in 1984. Acreage meant something. How many acres you farmed was a shorthand for how serious you were, how capable you were, how far you'd come. A man who'd farmed 320 acres and was now going down to 160 wasn't seen as strategic. He was seen as failing. He was seen as someone who'd overreached and gotten caught. Dale knew that. He just decided he'd rather be seen as small than be seen as gone. By the summer of 1985, First National had begun foreclosure proceedings on the expansion parcel. The bank moved methodically. Notices, filings, a court date. Dale didn't fight it. There was nothing to fight. The debt was real. The land was collateral. The mortgage was valid. The bank was doing exactly what the paperwork said it could do. At the same time, the county had been building a tax lien case on the expansion parcel's delinquent account. When the bank moved on the mortgage, the county coordinated its own action. Under Iowa law at the time, a tax sale could proceed on a property with a delinquent account after proper notice and waiting periods. The county wasn't trying to hurt Dale. They had their own obligations. Delinquent taxes had to be collected or sold. The tax auction was scheduled for October 14th, 1985. That's when the auctioneer showed up with his clipboard. He stood on the gravel road at the edge of the Briggs property and read from his notice. 320 acres, Millhaven Township. He paused. He looked at his paperwork again. Parcel 2, 160 acres, expansion ground, north of the county road. Just the one parcel, the one with the delinquent tax account, the one that had been legally separated from everything else 10 months earlier and recorded at the county courthouse on file. He looked up at Dale, who was standing near the fence line. Is that correct? This is parcel 2 only? Dale said yes. The auctioneer made a note. The auction proceeded. The expansion parcel, all 160 acres of high-leverage, over-mortgaged, drought-stressed expansion ground, was sold to satisfy the tax lien. The bank's foreclosure claim was resolved through the same proceeding. First National recovered a portion of what they were owed. Not all of it. The land sold for $118,000. They'd been owed $187,000. They wrote off the difference. That was their problem to carry, not Dale's. Because while all of that was happening, the core parcel, the original 160 acres, the home site, the bins, the shed, sat under a separate deed with a current tax account and no mortgage balance. The county had no claim on it. The bank had no claim on it. It was clean. Dale Briggs lost 160 acres that day. Half of what he'd once farmed. Half of what he'd once planned to hand down. He stood at that fence line and watched the auctioneer record the sale, and he didn't say much. But he didn't lose the farm. He kept the farm. There's a specific kind of accounting that happens after something like this. Not the financial kind, the personal kind. Dale sat at that same kitchen table a week after the auction with the same hand-drawn map. Except now it had a line down the middle of it. Half-marked sold, half-marked his. He still owed back property taxes on the core parcel from the period before the split, which Folger had helped him negotiate into a repayment plan with the county. He still had tight years ahead. Grain prices didn't recover the way anyone hoped. 1986 was harder than 1985. But he was working 160 acres he owned, with equipment he owned, and a tax account he was keeping current. He restructured. He protected the core. He absorbed the loss. The expansion ground was eventually bought by a larger operation and absorbed into their rotation. The new owner didn't build anything on it, didn't put up new bins, didn't plant a different crop, just farmed it the same way Dale had farmed it because the ground didn't care who held the deed. Dale farmed his 160 acres until 1999, when he sold it to his son for a fair price and moved into town. The land sold for $2,100 an acre, more than double what he'd paid for the expansion ground at the height of the boom. His son still farms it, paid off the purchase in 12 years. Here's what this story's really about. It's not about a clever trick. It's not about finding a loophole. It's about understanding what a deed actually is. A deed is a legal document that defines the boundary of a property and who owns it. A mortgage attaches to a deed. A tax line attaches to a deed. A foreclosure acts on a deed. When you have one deed covering everything you own, you have one point of failure. When you separate that into two legal descriptions with two separate recorded titles, you've created a firewall. One side of the firewall can burn, the other side doesn't have to. The law allows this. The county recorder's office processes these filings routinely. Surveyors do this work every week. It is not exotic, it is paperwork. And in the farm crisis of the 1980s, paperwork determined whether families survived or got wiped out. What cost Dale his 160 acres wasn't the subdivision. The subdivision saved him. What cost him was consolidating everything under one deed in the first place. Betting that the boom would hold, that land prices would keep climbing, that one giant mortgage over one giant parcel was a simpler way to operate. Simplicity is fine when things go right. When things go wrong, it means you have one target. And the bank and the county both knew how to hit a target. The farmers who survived the 1980s farm crisis weren't always the ones with the most land. They weren't always the ones with the newest equipment or the biggest operations. Some of the survivors were the ones who looked at their situation clearly enough to separate what could be lost from what had to be protected. Who made the hard decision before the deadline forced a worse one? Who understood that losing half wasn't the same as losing everything? Dale Briggs never talked much about what he did. It wasn't the kind of thing that made for a proud story at the coffee shop. He'd farmed 320 acres and ended up farming 160. By the measurement the community used, that was going backward. He knew how it looked. He let it look that way. He just kept farming. Now, if you're watching this, and you've ever faced a situation where you had to decide between protecting everything and losing everything, where the choice was between partial loss and total loss, drop a comment below. Would you have split the farm? Would you have sacrificed the expansion ground to protect the foundation? I want to know how you would have thought through that decision. And if you found value in how this story breaks down the legal mechanics of deed structure and how foreclosure actually works, hit subscribe. We cover stories like this every week. Real situations, real numbers, real decisions made by farmers and landowners trying to navigate impossible circumstances. The next story is already in progress. See you there. Paper matters. Structure matters. And sometimes, the most important thing you can do is draw a line down the middle of a map before someone else draws it for you.